Hey, today I'm gonna show how to make a prototype that simulates a Vision Pro style interaction with ordinary objects and replay it on Quest 3 in Passthrough. First, let's have a look how I made this prototype before. Notice that in a Quest 3 project, we have now like kind of a body rig. We have the head, left hand, right hand. The prototype uses a spatial anchor and essentially a few other objects. I have 3 states: the base state, which is this one, player idle, where we can see the full player with the cover and all the control elements. And then the suggestion state, where we see all the other covers and can basically select another one. Okay, first, let's go back to the editor and create a new Quest project. The standard Quest project looks like pretty similar to the iOS project. For now, I will remove the environment walls as I don't need them for this prototype. In this prototype, I will use the new spatial anchor that I can just locate anywhere in space, and I don't have to have a wall or floor or any other plane surface, though you can also use them with the Quest. The spatial anchor is at the center of the palm of the right hand, but can also be repositioned to left hand or head. Now I'm gonna select the spatial anchor, create a new empty group. I'm just gonna call this player group and start adding 3D or 2D objects to it. So now I will add the first cover, and it appears exactly at the center of the palm. I'll move the group a little bit in front of the palm so I can actually interact with it, and it's a little bit nicer feeling for me once I put on the headset and actually try the prototype. And I also gonna scale down the cover a little bit. And we can already try out how this looks in the headset. And I'm getting a first feeling for how it looks and feels to have the object attached to my hand. Now the next step in this experience is to click on the cover and then leave the spatial anchor in space. So I'll just add a on-click trigger and need to specify now the pointing device. Previously on iOS, we did not have any specification here. On Quest, we have the option between head, left hand, and right hand. For now, I'll choose right hand, and I'll come back to the other options later. This essentially means that I need to point with the right hand on this object, and if I click left or right hand, I will execute or activate this trigger. So what I want to do is to set the anchor in space. So I add a set anchor action and set the control object to this spatial anchor. And we can try this out again immediately. I can simply reload this prototype by pinching the middle finger, and I will get all updates that I made from the editor directly on my headset. So now I can again move everything around as planned. And as soon as I click, I will leave this in space without any drift. Now that we have the first interaction ready, I can continue and duplicate this state. From here, I can either simulate the click event and transition to the next state, or choose the state down here in the list of states. Now I'm in a new state. I'm gonna rename this to player idle. Now in this state, I want the background and controls of the player. Now I'm gonna change the size so everything fits together. Make this a bit smaller. And I will also nest the controls to my cover. That means I need to move this, since this will be an AR and we're not gonna have this nice uniform high contrast background. I will also add a background. So for now, I'm just gonna create a new rectangle. I'm also changing the material to unlit, and also going to pass in some values for a light, slightly washed out blue. And because I want a little bit of a spatial feeling, I'm also moving my textures a little bit like out of each other. So I really get this sense of depth. And to make sure that I'm not going to run into any rendering issues, I will also set the covers sort order in the design panel to 1. This ensures that it will always be rendered on top. Okay, let's check out how this looks in Quest. Again, I'm restarting the flow to get all my latest updates. I see the first cover following my hand, and on click, it is supposed to stay in space, but we forgot one important step. So let's fix this. In order to have the spatial anchor stay in space at the same position where we set it in the previous state, we have to ensure that it's also locked in the current state. To do that, I'm simply going to the cover where I previously set the anchor locked on click and add a set anchor action on start. I'm going to use the same spatial anchor, and now the anchor will be fixed in space. Again, in headset, I'm restarting the flow to get my latest updates. The UI follows my hand, and as soon as I click, it stays in space. But of course, I don't want it to be randomly positioned in space, so I need to correct it and ideally have it look at me. So let's fix that. I want the whole group to always face the user. So select the group and on start set a look at action that is looking at the head. Because of the coordinate systems of different objects, I see now the exact opposite of what I want to see. And that is why we're using this group. So the only thing we need to do is to apply a 180-degree rotation to the cover, and everything else will adjust to that. And I can also remove the on-click trigger that I used previously. Now let's create the interaction to open up the suggestions. I'll first add a new while hover trigger, and this time change the pointing device to head. And I will add a shake action that moves the whole cover just a little bit towards the user. I'm going to set a small duration, iteration to 1, direction to default, and maybe a small out back. So let's see what it does. Since all of this is real time, I can simply move down my head or rotate my head towards the object, and as soon as I see that it's the hover triggering, the UI comes a little bit closer to the user. I can play this and try this out as many times as I want. This is pretty aggressive, I think. So I'm just gonna make it a little bit less, something like this. And how does this? Yeah, this can be nice. So let's try it out on the headset. Again, I'm just gonna restart the flow and position everything in space and see that now the UI is rotating always to me. And if I look at the cover, it's coming a little bit towards me. The second part of the interaction is a simple click trigger. This time I'm also setting the pointing device to head again to essentially match my hover interaction. This means that as soon as the head is pointing at the cover, any click will be registered and fire this event. Now I'm just going to go ahead and add a change state action again. I'm going to duplicate the state, and again I'm free to either jump to the new state here in the list or transition to the next state. I'm going to rename this state to suggestions, and since I don't want to see the controls, I'm just going to scale them down to 0 and make them fast disappear. And then adding my other cover elements. Just gonna add them all one by one under each other. And I'm gonna make a layout a little bit inspired by an Apple Watch face. Okay. This looks already really great. So now I'm just gonna add a little bit more depth. To have a little bit more to play with, I will also add hover interactions to each of those covers. I want them to react to my head, so I set the pointing device to head and set up a small interaction. Just moves them very subtle, short duration of time, only once, and with a small bounce. I can simply check out what it does. And this looks already really, really great. If I want to have the same behavior on other objects, I can simply go here and press the copy button on the trigger, which essentially will copy the whole behavior. You can then go ahead, select a different object, and on the plus in the prototyping panel, just press paste trigger, and I will have the same behavior on this object. Once in the headset, again, I'm going to restart the flow. Back at the beginning, first I set the spatial anchor in space. The UI rotates towards me and sticks nicely in space. And once I look at the object, I can simply click on it and get all my other elements. To complete the round trip, I want to click on the previously already selected cover and essentially go back to the previous state. Since I already have the setup with the hover animation and the click, the only thing I have to do is to select the correct state and the change state action. In this case, it's the first step that I want to go back to. Of course, I could also now set up a different kind of interaction where I would click on, for example, this or this cover, and then swap them out in new state. I restart the flow, starting with positioning the cover in space. I'll see the controls and the cover. I can select the cover, hover over all the other elements, and go back to my previous state. Now we completed this basic prototype with a full round trip and a Vision Pro style interaction. Let us know on Discord what you think.